No one at Willow Creek understood why a 3-year-old elephant named Milo had stopped eating, stopped moving, and stopped wanting to live until the morning an 8-week-old orphaned kitten marched straight into his enclosure and refused to come back out. It should have been a disaster. It should have been dangerous. Instead, what happened next was something no one, not even the veterinarians, could explain. Because that tiny kitten wasn't just approaching a grieving giant. He was about to start a war against death itself. And Milo, he finally reacted. The first time Dr. Emily Carter saw him that morning, she felt her breath catch the way it does when you stumble upon something sacred or something dying. Beneath the sprawling branches of the old live oak tree at Willow Creek Wildlife Reserve, the young elephant stood exactly where he had stood the day before, and the day before that, and according to the overnight logs, almost every hour of the last 72. Milo did not blink when the wind brushed against his ears. He did not flinch when a blue jay swooped down to scold him. He did not shift a single inch while the early Texas sun stretched across the valley floor, turning his gray skin into the color of cold iron. He stood there like a monument someone had forgotten to carve words into, silent, hollow, frighteningly still. Emily walked toward him with footsteps soft enough to respect grief, but firm enough to remind herself she was still a vet, still a professional, still responsible for this life even when it looked suspended in some unreachable realm. The grass was wet with dawn. Her boots left dark impressions behind her, as though she were walking across a memory instead of soil. 3 months. That's how long it had been since the accident on Highway 29. 3 months since the circus trailer flipped in the rain, spilling chaos and pain across the asphalt. 3 months since Milo, just 3 years old and barely tall enough to see over his mother's shoulder, watched the only anchor he had in the world take her last breath under flashing ambulance lights. 3 months since Emily herself placed a trembling hand on the little elephant's back and felt his body go quiet, as if a switch inside him had been turned off. Now here he was, standing like a ghost who hadn't realized he was gone. She stopped 10 feet away. Any closer and he would feel her presence, not that he ever reacted to it. Milo had retreated into a place beyond touch, beyond treatment, beyond anything they'd thrown at him, enrichment toys, soothing sounds, gentle introductions to other elephants his age. Nothing reached him. He ate only when forced to. He slept standing. He had chosen the oak tree as his vigil point and refused to leave it. Emily studied him, the way his trunk hung limp and unmoving, the way his eyes stared at nothing and everything at once. It was the same look she had seen on him the night of the accident. That was what made it dangerous. Grief this deep in elephants didn't fade. It hollowed, it consumed, and sometimes it killed. She opened her tablet, checking his vitals from last night. Stable, but declining. That phrase had appeared so many times in her reports, she hardly needed to type it anymore. "Milo," she said softly, though she knew he wouldn't answer. "Good morning." Nothing. No blink. No breath change. No flick of an air to acknowledge another living soul was nearby. She crouched down, trying to catch the faintest glimmer of life in those dark eyes. But they were empty, as if someone had shuttered the windows from the inside. When she rose to her feet again, she was aware of the ache settling into her chest. She'd treated elephants for 15 years, broken bones, infections, dehydration, even gunshot wounds, but nothing humbled her like this, the slow starvation of a heart that no longer wanted to beat. "Morning, Doc," a voice carried from behind her. Jake Turner approached with his usual long stride, wiping his hands on a rag that looked like it had seen at least 2 decades of hard labor. Jake had been with Willow Creek longer than anyone. He'd raised calves, rescued strays, stitched up half the animals in the valley, and buried more than he cared to admit. But even he stopped short when he reached Emily's side, shoulders sagging in quiet defeat. "No change, huh?" he asked, though the answer was written all over Milo's unmoving frame. "No." Emily murmured. He hasn't slept. He hasn't moved. He's just there. Jake let out a sound that wasn't quite a sigh. Some grief doesn't drain. It just stands still. A gust of wind rustled the branches above. Leaves drifted down over Milo's head, settling on his back like tiny weightless stones. He didn't react. Emily hated this part, the moment when hope felt like a lie you told yourself to stay upright. She pressed her palms together, steadying her voice. If he keeps going like this, we're going to lose him. Jake didn't argue. He never did when she said something she'd been avoiding for too long. The sun climbed higher, brightening the valley, warming the air, painting Willow Creek in gold. Behind them, the morning staff began their rounds, feed carts rolling, gates opening, the calls of animals waking to a new day. Life moved on even when a heart refused to follow. Emily glanced across the horizon at the rows of enclosures, the rehab barn, the veterinary station, and the little cabin where volunteers stayed on weekends. It was a sanctuary built on second chances, but Milo had not taken his, and that terrified her. She turned back to him, lowering her voice as if speaking to someone who might break if startled. We're running out of time, sweetheart. I don't know what else to try. There it was, the truth she had avoided writing in every medical update. I don't know how to save you. For a long, unbearable moment, the world held still. A breath, a leaf settling, a silence so heavy it pinned her heart in place. Then, a single truck engine sounded from the gate entrance far across the reserve. Emily didn't know it yet, but that truck carried a cardboard box no bigger than a shoebox. And inside that box was a creature whose heartbeat weighed less than a handful of coins, yet would soon bang on the walls of Milo's grief harder than any medicine she had ever used. If fate could be loud, it would have screamed. But instead, it whispered, and everything began to change. If you're still with us, you're part of a remarkable community here at Whispering Hearts, where real stories of extraordinary animal connections come to life. Every subscriber helps us share more heart-touching moments that reveal the power of compassion across species. Don't forget to hit subscribe, because the journey ahead is one you'll feel long after the story ends. Emily turned toward the distant engine, unaware that the smallest warrior she would ever meet was about to arrive. Tiny, furious, and absolutely unwilling to let a broken-hearted elephant fade away. Jake, she said, shading her eyes to see the gate more clearly. Do you hear that? He nodded. Yeah. Something's coming. Something that would destroy the quiet grief under the oak. Something that would drag Milo back into the world whether he wanted it or not. Let's go, Emily whispered. And together, they walked toward the sound that would rewrite everything. The drive out to the front gate took Emily and Jake past the quiet parts of Willow Creek. The weather-beaten barn, the fenced wetlands shimmering under morning light, and the gravel paths that branched like pale rivers between the pastures. But as the truck engine rolled closer, Emily felt something else rising too. The memory she had tried for months to bury. The night everything changed for Milo. It always began the same way. Rain. Texas rain. Heavy and sudden. The kind that hits the world like a warning. She remembered the call from highway patrol, the frantic directions, the way her tires skidded as she pulled up beside a toppled circus trailer sprawled across the asphalt like a wounded giant. Sirens painted the dark with blue and red streaks. The smell of burnt rubber drifted across the road, and in the middle of it, 2 elephants. Milo's mother lay on her side, blood pooling beneath her shoulder where the metal frame had crushed her. Her breaths were sharp, shallow, too far apart. Milo, still a baby then, pressed himself against her ribs, nudging, pushing, trying desperately to lift her with a trunk too small to understand why she wouldn't move. Emily had knelt beside him, hands trembling as she checked the mother's pulse. She already knew the truth. Every medic there knew. But Milo didn't. His squeals echoed across the wet highway, sharp and trembling with a terror that pierced bone. Emily could still feel the tremor of his tiny body leaning into her as she tried to coax him away. "Sweetheart," she whispered to him that night, "you need to step back. Please." But he refused. He stayed until the moment the paramedics covered his mother's face with a white sheet, and that was when something inside him changed. His cries went silent all at once, cut short as though the sound had been taken from him. His small frame froze. His eyes went empty. And for the first time in her career, Emily saw an animal shut down in real time. Now, months later, that same emptiness had followed him straight into Willow Creek. And here she was, driving toward another creature who, if the call was correct, had also just lost its mother. The truck waiting at the gate belonged to the Dallas Animal Rescue Crew. Dust on the fenders, river mud along the tires. A young rescue officer stepped out, her uniform still damp, her hair stuck to her cheek as if she had run through rain moments ago. In her hands, she carried a small cardboard box, its bottom sagging slightly from moisture. "Dr. Carter?" the young woman asked, breath uneven. "Yes," the officer swallowed. "We pulled this little one from under the old Trinity Bridge. The mother, she didn't make it. Got caught in the current after the storm last night." Her voice cracked before she steadied it. "The kitten wouldn't leave her, tried to claw her back to shore." Emily's throat tightened. Not again, she thought. Not another baby trying to revive a mother already gone. "Let me see," she murmured. Carefully, the officer lifted the lid. The creature inside was so small it hardly seemed real. Just a palm-sized bundle of wet gray stripes and trembling breath. His fur clung to his ribs, his ears flattened tight against his skull, and his eyes, wide, blazing, terrified, snapped up at Emily the instant the light touched him. A hiss ripped out of him, then another, then a high, furious yowl as he swiped a paw no bigger than a bottle cap toward her face. "Well," Jake muttered, peering over her shoulder, "there's a feisty one." "He's scared," Emily said softly. "And starving." The kitten dug his claws into the soggy cardboard like he was anchoring himself to the last scrap of safety left on Earth. His little chest heaved with panic, yet there was something sharp under the fear, defiance, will, an insistence that the world wasn't going to break him, no matter how small he was. Emily knew that look. It was the exact opposite of Milo's emptiness, but cut from the same grief. Lily's voice chimed from behind them. Gentle, hopeful. "What's his name?" "He doesn't have one yet," Emily answered. Lily crouched beside the box. The kitten bristled, hissed, swatted. Lily didn't flinch. Instead, she whispered, "Hey, I know that feeling. Thinking everything's trying to hurt you when all you want is your mom back." The kitten paused, just long enough for the sorrow under his anger to show through. Emily felt her chest tighten again. Two orphans on two very different mornings, both fighting their own way through the dark. "We'll call him Scout," she said quietly. "He survived the storm. He deserves a name that carries strength." Jake nodded approvingly. "Scout it is. What's the plan, Doc?" "The plan," she said, lifting the box, "is to stabilize him. Fluids, warmth, calorie paste, and monitoring every hour." Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "About that. You know the ICU barn is full. Deer fawn, the burned fox from last. Weak, those orphaned raccoons. You're not going to have space in there for another tiny critter." Emily already knew. She had done the mental math twice. She'd walked through the barn that morning praying for an empty corner, but every bed was filled, and Scout needed constant supervision. She began walking toward the vet cabin, the kitten's tiny body vibrating with stress in her arms. "I'll improvise something," she said, though she had no idea what that something would be. "Doc." Jake's voice followed her, low and uneasy. "There is one place you could monitor him from anywhere in the reserve." She slowed. Jake. He caught up, lowering his voice. Just hear me out. Milo's area is fully wired with cameras. Perfect visibility. Lots of shade. No other animals. And let's face it, Milo hasn't so much as lifted a toe in weeks. He wouldn't hurt a fly. No, Emily said immediately. A kitten in a 3-ton elephant's habitat? Absolutely not. Too risky. Is it? Jake countered gently. For who? She stopped walking. The weight of his words pressed into the morning air. I'm not saying throw the kitten at him, Jake continued. I'm saying maybe, just maybe, Milo doesn't need more quiet. Maybe quiet is killing him. Maybe he needs something alive, something unpredictable, something demanding. Emily looked down at Scout, who hissed at a leaf as if it had personally offended him. Something, Jake said, that refuses to be ignored. The idea was insanity, reckless, unorthodox. And yet, she remembered Milo's eyes the night he lost his mother, wide, shaking, full of terror, right before they emptied out. She remembered Scout's eyes just moments ago, wide, shaking, full of terror, but fighting back with everything he had. 2 different kinds of heartbreak, 2 different ways of holding on, and maybe, just maybe, one could reach the other. We'll need approval, she whispered. Jake nodded. Then let's get it. Emily looked once more at Scout, trembling and furious in her arms. Little one, she murmured, I don't know where you came from, but something tells me you didn't end up here by accident. Behind her, the wind rustled the oak branches at the far end of the valley, the same branches beneath which a lonely young elephant still waited, unmoving, for something that might never return. Until now. All right, Emily whispered. Let's try. The rain had finally stopped by the time Emily and Jake carried Scout across the gravel path toward the veterinary cabin, but the clouds still sagged low, leaving the world wrapped in a damp gray hush. Willow Creek smelled of wet cedar and fresh mud, the kind of scent that made the whole reserve feel half asleep. But the trembling creature in Emily's arms was anything but sleepy. He was a quivering knot of nerves and outrage. The cardboard box he'd arrived in sagged with every step, waterlogged from the rescue. Scout kept poking his head out, fur spiked in every direction, eyes darting like he was preparing to leap at anything that moved, even the raindrops slipping off the brim of Emily's hat. Every few seconds he let out a hiss, though his tiny voice made it sound more like a squeaky protest than a threat. Easy little guy, Emily murmured, shifting her hold so his front paws could brace against her arm instead of the collapsing box. You're safe now. Safe wasn't a concept Scout had accepted yet. He gripped the edge of her sleeve with claws that barely pricked her skin, but clung with the determination of someone who had fought through water, fear, and the dark underside of a bridge. His whole body buzzed with a defiance that felt too big for a kitten his size. Jake walked beside them, keeping an eye on Scout's every twitch. I'll give him this, he said quietly. He's got more fire in him than half the ranch cats in this county. That's fear, Emily corrected gently. Fear wearing armor. Jake nodded. Yeah, I recognize it. As they approached the cabin, the door swung open before either of them reached it. Lily stepped out, cheeks flushed, her long braid damp at the ends. She must have been waiting by the window since the call came in. Lily's heart had always latched onto the broken things. The abandoned raccoon kits, the owl with the crooked wing, the coyote pup who cried when left alone. But this kitten seemed to pull something deeper out of her. Oh my goodness, she breathed, putting a hand to her chest as she peered at Scout. He's so tiny. Tiny but fierce, Jake said. Scout hissed at him. Lily knelt slowly, hands open, keeping her voice soft. Hey, baby. Nobody here's gonna hurt you. Scout's ears flattened. His pupils narrowed to needle points. He gave a small, warning growl that vibrated more in his ribs than in the air. He's traumatized, Emily said quietly. We need to move carefully." Lily nodded with a seriousness that didn't match her 17 years. "I know that look. I used to have that look." She paused, meeting Emily's eyes. "When I first came here." Emily felt a tug of warmth. Lily didn't talk much about her own struggles. The anxiety, the panic spells, the feeling of being too much and not enough for everyone around her. But something in Scout mirrored a younger version of her, and that recognition softened her expression. "Well," Lily whispered, "we'll help him breathe again." Inside the cabin, the lights hummed with a warm glow, and the metal counters gleamed from an early morning cleaning. Emily set Scout on a folded towel and removed the remnants of the cardboard box. The kitten immediately crouched low, tail tucked, ears back, body trembling so hard she could see the motion ripple through his fur. She worked slowly, narrating each movement. "I'm going to check your paws. Now, good. Now your ribs, little thin but no fractures." Her voice was clinical but gentle, each syllable a handhold for Scout to cling to. Scout didn't like it. He hissed, swatted, wriggled, but he didn't bite. That alone told Emily a lot. "He's scared," she murmured to Jake, "but he isn't mean." "Most of the dangerous ones I've met weren't mean," Jake replied. "Just scared." The fluids went in next. Subcutaneous, a tiny needle, no more painful than a thorn. Scout froze at the first prick, stiffened, then let out the saddest, tiniest cry Emily had ever heard. Not angry, not defensive, just lost. Lily's breath hitched. She looked away, blinking quickly. When Scout's tremors finally eased under the warmth of the towel and the rehydrating fluid, Emily stepped back. "He'll stabilize," she said, "but we need a place for him while he recovers." Jake leaned against the counter. "Still no room in ICU?" "None," Emily replied, "and he needs checks every hour." There was a silence, a long one, the kind that felt like standing at the edge of something important. Jake crossed his arms. "Doc, Milo's habitat is wired better than the ICU barn. Cameras, full perimeter, clear sight lines. You can check on Scout from your phone while you're doing rounds." "It's not about convenience," Emily said. "It's about safety." Jake raised an eyebrow. "For who?" She stared at him, knowing exactly what he meant. Milo, the 3-ton elephant who hadn't moved in days, was a danger to no one. If anything, the world was a danger to him. Then Jake added softly, "Maybe both of them need something alive, something breathing, something that won't just sit there quietly while they fade." It was an absurd idea, and yet she thought again of Milo standing under the oak tree, unmoving. She thought of Scout clinging to the towel like it was the last piece of home. Two creatures whose worlds had cracked open in different ways. One going silent, the other screaming. Maybe their fractures fit together. She inhaled slowly. "We'll need Harris's approval." "We'll get it," Jake said. "One way or another." Just then a door creaked open and Grace, the communications intern, peeked in, carrying a small camera rig. "Sorry," she whispered. "Didn't mean to interrupt. I just heard we had a new resident." Scout hissed at her too. Grace blinked. "Well, he's spirited." Lily laughed under her breath. "That's one word for it." Emily lifted Scout again, careful not to disturb the towel wrapped around him. His claws gripped her shirt instinctively. "We're not out of the woods yet," she said softly to the little creature. "But I promise we're going to try." Scout trembled, then pressed his tiny head briefly against her hand, so fast she almost didn't feel it. A single second of trust before fear crept back in. Emily held him closer. Outside, the clouds began to break, and sunlight spilled across the valley, reaching all the way to the oak tree where Milo still stood motionless, unaware that the smallest survivor in Texas was about to change the course of his life. "Let's go," Emily said. And together, Emily, Jake, Lily, Grace, and one damp, indignant kitten, they stepped outside into the clearing sky, headed toward the meeting that would decide their next impossible move. The meeting room at Willow Creek wasn't much of a room at all. Just a long wooden table wedged between two windows and a bulletin board pinned with maps of the reserve, feeding schedules, and a faded photo of the very first rescue animal ever brought through their gates. But that morning, as Emily carried Scout inside with Jake and Lily close behind, the air felt tighter than usual, as if the walls already knew something unorthodox was about to be proposed. Scout, wrapped in a towel and tucked against her chest, was still trembling. Every so often he'd let out a soft growl as though warning the world he hadn't forgiven it for everything that had happened. At the far end of the table sat Mr. Harris, the director of Willow Creek. Broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and known for balancing compassion with a rigid respect for regulations. He set down the binder he'd been reviewing and eyed the group approaching him. "That the kitten?" he asked. Emily nodded. "Scout, 8 weeks old, lost his mother last night in the flood." Harris leaned forward, examining Scout through the edge of his glasses. The kitten responded by hissing at him with all the rage of a creature that weighed barely a pound. "Well," Harris muttered, "he's lively." "He's scared," Lily said softly from behind Emily. Harris acknowledged the correction with a brief nod before turning his attention to Jake. "All right. I assume you're all here because you need something." Jake took a breath. "We're here because we have a situation with Milo, and Scout might be part of the solution." Harris's eyebrows rose in a way that said he already suspected trouble. "Go on." Emily shifted Scout slightly so she could meet Harris's gaze. "Milo's decline is accelerating. He's losing weight despite every intervention. He hasn't shown any voluntary movement or interest in his surroundings for weeks. We're reaching a critical point." Harris nodded grimly. "I read your reports." She hesitated only a second before saying the words she dreaded typing every night. "If he continues like this, we may lose him." Silence settled over the room. Even Scout stopped trembling long enough to listen. Jake stepped in. "Milo doesn't need more quiet. We've been treating him like a fragile vase, and he's fading anyway. I think he needs something alive. Something unpredictable. Something that demands a reaction." Harris leaned back slowly. "Jake, where exactly are you going with this?" Jake exchanged a brief glance with Emily before answering. "We want to place Scout in Milo's habitat." Harris blinked once, then twice. Then he stared at them as if waiting for someone to laugh and reveal it was a joke. When no one did, Harris set his glasses down with exaggerated care. "You want to put a 1-pound kitten inside the enclosure of a 3,000-pound elephant." "It's safer than it sounds," Jake replied. "No," Harris said immediately. "No, it's not. It sounds exactly as dangerous as it is." Emily stepped forward. "Harris, listen. Milo is gentle, always has been. He's never shown aggression toward anything, not even when he was in the circus. And right now he isn't reacting to the world at all. He won't hurt Scout." "And if Scout gets hurt anyway?" Harris countered. "A fall, a misstep, a panic reaction. One wrong twitch from Milo and that kitten is gone. Then we're liable. And cruel." "He won't," Emily insisted. "Milo isn't moving. He's barely existing." Harris wasn't swayed, which means he's unpredictable. Depression in elephants can create sudden responses, startle reactions, panic flares. And you want to introduce a small, fast-moving creature into the mix? Emily steadied herself. "I want to introduce life into the mix." Harris opened his mouth to argue, but Lily stepped forward, clutching her hands together. "Sir, with respect, Milo is lonely. Not the kind of lonely where someone's just sad. The kind where you disappear from yourself. I know that feeling. And Scout," she gestured to the kitten, is fighting so hard not to disappear. Maybe they need each other. Harris looked at her, expression softening just a fraction. Then Grace slipped into the doorway, holding her tablet against her chest. "Mr. Harris, sir, I've been reviewing the behavior footage from the past 2 weeks. Milo hasn't reacted to anything. Not birds, not the feeding cart, not the enrichment toys. Nothing. But when the rescue truck came this morning," she swallowed. He moved his ear, just a little, like he sensed something. Emily's heart lurched. She hadn't noticed that. Harris rubbed his forehead. "This is still a terrible idea." Jake nodded. "Yep, which is why it might work. We've tried everything that makes sense. Maybe what Milo needs doesn't make sense." Emily exhaled, speaking more quietly now. "I can monitor Scout from every angle. Milo's habitat has full camera coverage, and I'll stay on site the first 24 hours. We won't take our eyes off them." "And if something goes wrong?" Harris asked. "Then I pull Scout out immediately." Harris leaned back in his chair, staring at Scout, then past him as though picturing Milo under the oak tree. The grief that had haunted the reserve for months seemed to hang between them like fog. Finally, after a long, heavy silence, he said, "If one thing, one single thing, looks unsafe, we end it. Immediately. No arguments." Emily nodded without hesitation. "Agreed. And the entire setup goes on record as an observational case study," Harris added. "If anyone asks, we didn't throw a kitten in with an elephant. We placed 2 trauma survivors in a shared, monitored habitat to assess behavioral interaction." Jake snorted. "That's a fancy way of saying we're trying something crazy." "It's the only way I'm signing off on it," Harris replied. He reached for the paper on the table, a standard authorization form, and scribbled his signature across the bottom. "God help us," he muttered. "I hope you're right." As Emily lifted Scout, the kitten pressed his small head into the crook of her arm for the briefest moment. Seeking warmth, maybe grounding himself, maybe whispering that fragile instinct every living thing clings to when it's been torn out of safety. "Don't let go." She wouldn't. Not now. Not with 2 broken hearts hanging in the balance. "All right," Emily whispered. "Let's go introduce you to someone." She stepped toward the door as Jake, Lily, and Grace followed. Harris remained seated, staring after them with the expression of a man hoping desperately that the world still had room for miracles, because they needed one, and they needed it today. By late afternoon, the clouds had cleared completely, leaving Willow Creek washed clean and bright. The air smelled of damp soil and sun-warmed cedar, the kind of scent that usually comforted Emily. But today, her pulse beat too fast for her to notice. In her arms, Scout squirmed beneath the towel, emitting tiny growls that sounded more stubborn than dangerous. Jake walked beside her as they approached Milo's habitat. The live oak tree at the center of the field cast a long shadow across the grass, and beneath it stood Milo, unchanged, unmoving, a statue carved from sorrow. Emily slowed her steps, her throat tightening. "He hasn't shifted all day," she whispered. Jake nodded. "Same as yesterday, same as the week before." He paused, looking down at Scout, who hissed fiercely at a passing grasshopper. "All right, little warrior, time to see if you're the spark we've been waiting for." The gate creaked as Emily pushed it open. The sound echoed across the habitat. But Milo didn't react. He didn't even flick an ear. Emily's heart ached. "Sweet boy," she murmured under her breath. Jake stepped inside first, checking the perimeter, making sure nothing had been left behind that could spook the kitten or accidentally trip him. Then he motioned to Emily. She inhaled deeply. "Okay, Scout," she whispered. "We meet gently. We move slowly, and we pray this isn't the worst idea I've ever approved." Scout didn't care for plans. He wriggled out of her hands the moment her grip loosened, landing in the grass like a wet, angry cotton ball. For a second, he froze. Ears perked, tail twitching, vibrissae quivering as he sniffed the air. Then he saw Milo, a mountain, a shadow, a towering, unmoving mass of gray. Scout's entire body stiffened. Emily whispered, "It's all right, baby. Just breathe." But Scout didn't breathe. He decided. In a flash, the trembling stopped, and something raw and fierce replaced it. The kitten arched his back, puffed up his fur, hissed with every ounce of bravado his small lungs could muster, and charged straight at Milo. "Whoa!" Jake grabbed Emily's arm as she instinctively stepped forward. "Wait, let him go!" Scout bolted across the open ground, legs pumping wildly, as if he were sprinting into battle against a creature 1,000 times his size. His growl came out in a series of squeaks, but the intention was unmistakable. He wasn't attacking Milo. He was attacking the world that had betrayed him. Emily swallowed hard. "He's terrified." Jake nodded quietly. "And fighting through it." Scout reached Milo's massive front leg and launched his first strike, a tiny paw batting against thick elephant skin, claws barely catching it all. He swiped again and again. He circled the leg like a furious orbit, nipping, hopping, attempting to scale the giant limb only to slide down each time. Milo did not move. He did not blink. He did not look down. Emily's heart twisted painfully. He doesn't even notice him. "Give it time," Jake murmured. "Scout sure as hell isn't quitting." And he wasn't. Scout leapt back, his little chest heaving, then charged again, letting out a squeak roar so earnest it hurt to hear. He flung himself against Milo's skin, bounced off, scrambled up, slipped, rolled, stood, hissed, and repeated the entire chaos like a creature determined to be seen by someone who no longer saw the world. It was pitiful. It was brave. It was everything grief looked like when it refused to surrender. Lily and Grace appeared quietly at the observation rail outside the gate, drawn by the commotion. Grace clutched her tablet to her chest, whispering, "Oh my gosh, is he actually attacking him?" "It's not an attack," Emily said softly. "It's a plea." Scout, panting now, switched tactics. He crouched low, wiggled his hindquarters, then sprung upward, aiming for Milo's trunk, which hung slack against the ground. His paws slapped against it, batting at the soft tip. Still no reaction. Not from Milo, but Scout. Scout's frustration began to show. His squeaks turned confused. His attack slowed, then sped up, then slowed again. He circled Milo once, twice, then sat down abruptly as if his tiny brain couldn't understand why the world's biggest animal refused to notice him. Emily felt tears sting the corners of her eyes. Lily whispered, "He just wants someone to look at him." "That's what trauma does," Emily replied shakily. "It says fight or shut down. Scout is fighting. Milo..." She glanced at the unmoving giant. "He's already shut down." For a long moment, nothing happened. The reserve went quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause. Scout's breathing steadied. His tail flicked once. Then he let out a single, soft cry. Not a hiss, not a growl, but something small and aching. It was the sound of a heart calling into a room it wasn't sure had anyone left inside. Emily clasped her hands together, helpless. Jake exhaled beside her. Poor kid. Scout curled into a tiny ball at the base of Milo's foot, like exhaustion had finally caught him. His sides rose and fell in quick, uneven breaths. Milo didn't move. Not a twitch, not a sigh. But something about the tableau, the smallest survivor pressed against the most broken, made Emily feel like they were witnessing the first moment of a storm forming miles away. Invisible, but inevitable. Jake murmured, "Well, that was a hell of a first meeting." Emily nodded slowly. It was. Then, barely above a whisper, she added, "And something tells me it won't be the last." Outside the habitat, the sun dipped lower, warming the field in amber light. For the first time all day, the shadow beneath the oak tree didn't look so cold. Scout slept. Milo stood, and between them in the quiet grass, something unseen shifted, subtle as a heartbeat returning after too long a silence. The first night Scout spent in Milo's habitat stretched longer than anyone expected. Emily barely slept. She checked the cameras every hour, sometimes every 20 minutes, searching each frame for any sign of danger. But all she saw was exactly what she'd left: Milo, motionless beneath the oak tree, and Scout curled in a trembling knot beside his massive foot. At 2 a.m., Scout woke. He stretched, blinked, sniffed the air, and immediately launched another tiny attack on Milo's leg, as though grief had a schedule he refused to fall behind on. His squeaky growls echoed through the night. Milo did not react. By dawn, Scout had dropped from exhaustion twice, then risen again to resume his one-sided war. When morning finally came, Emily stood in the observation post with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, eyes fixed on the monitors. Jake joined her, also carrying a full mug he seemed to have forgotten about. "Well," Jake said, rubbing a hand across his jaw, "the kid's persistent." "Persistent?" Emily echoed. "Or terrified?" As the sun rose, Scout crouched low in the grass, haunches wiggling, preparing for his morning battle charge. Then he sprang forward with all the determination of a soldier going into his 8th campaign. He latched onto Milo's leg again, swatted, clung, slipped, growled, hopped sideways to gain momentum, tried again. Milo didn't blink. Jake shook his head. "That kitten's going to wear himself bald trying to get a reaction." Emily didn't respond, because something inside her, something deep and flickering, was quietly terrified and wouldn't. But Scout didn't stop. Day 2, Day 3, Day 4. Morning after morning, Scout rose with the same fiery resolve, as though the universe had personally offended him by placing him beside a creature who refused to acknowledge he existed. Grace set up 2 new cameras with wider angles so they could capture Scout's full attack zones. During lunch breaks, staff members gathered around the screens like children watching a slapstick cartoon, except no one laughed too loudly. There was something heartbreakingly earnest in the way Scout kept returning, no matter how futile it looked. Day 5 brought new tactics. Scout attempted the high ground approach, climbing halfway up a nearby rock, wobbling, then launching himself dramatically toward Milo's leg. He missed by a foot and face planted in the dirt. He lay there for a moment, stunned, then stood, shook himself, and charged again. Lily covered her mouth. He's doing everything he can to matter. Emily swallowed hard. Yes, he is. Day 6, Scout discovered Milo's trunk. The limp, unmoving appendage touched the ground just within paw's reach. Scout crouched, tail swishing, then batted at it 40 times in a row, each swat accompanied by a small grunt of effort. Milo did not lift it, did not twitch, did not even acknowledge the taps that wouldn't have tickled a mosquito. But Scout's face. Oh, Scout's face. By the 20th hit, confusion clouded his wide blue eyes. By the 30th, frustration took over. By the 40th, his tiny chest fluttered with a sound Emily had never heard from a kitten. Part cry, part plea. Jake exhaled. "He's asking for someone to see him." Emily's voice cracked. "Yes." Day 7 delivered a small twist. Scout wandered farther across the 2-acre space, sniffing rocks, inspecting the water trough, climbing up a stump and tumbling down again. He explored, not with curiosity, but with the restless energy of someone searching for something that didn't exist. But within minutes, he always returned to Milo's side. "Look at that," Jake murmured. "He won't leave him, not even for long." "He knows loneliness when he sees it," Emily whispered, "and he refuses to let Milo disappear." That sentence stayed in the air like a truth no one wanted to touch. By day 8, tension had turned into something sharper, heavier. Scout approached Milo not with his usual bravado, but with a slower, almost solemn determination. He stood before the elephant's massive foot, tail low, shoulders trembling slightly. Then, softly, almost questioning, he meowed. Just a single, small sound. Not a challenge, not a threat, just, "Are you there? Do you see me?" The habitat grew terribly still. Emily leaned forward, hands gripping the console. Jake stopped drinking his coffee and held his breath. Grace looked up from her tablet, frozen, and then Milo moved. Only a fraction, barely more than a twitch, but his trunk shifted, just an inch, and one ear flicked as if registering a presence he had ignored for months. Scout jerked back in surprise. Jake whispered, "Holy, did he just—" "He did," Emily breathed. "He did." Scout's reaction was explosive. The tiny warrior sprang into the air, spinning in confused joy. He raced in circles, tail high, squeaking triumphantly. He rolled onto his back, kicked his paws, scrambled to his feet, then pounced on absolutely nothing. Pure victory, pure shock, pure delight. For the first time in 3 months, Milo's eyelids lifted, revealing a faint glimmer of awareness behind them. Not recognition, not warmth, just a flicker, a spark. It vanished almost immediately, but it had happened. Emily braced both hands on the counter, blinking rapidly as her lungs remembered how to breathe. "He saw him," she whispered. "Even if just for a second, he saw him." Lily clasped her hands together, eyes shining. Scout woke him up. "Not fully," Emily murmured. "Not yet." But he cracked the shell. Jake nodded slowly. Sometimes that's all it takes. The oak branch swayed gently in a breeze that had not existed a moment ago. Scout finally collapsed into a small heap of exhaustion at Milo's feet, chest rising and falling in wild little bursts, a triumphant warrior toppled by his own celebration. Milo stared into the distance again, but his trunk, it didn't hang quite as lifelessly as before. 8 days, Jake said softly. Took him 8 days to get a single reaction. Emily wiped her eyes. 8 days, to light a spark. She looked out at the habitat, at the giant who had finally twitched and the kitten who had refused to quit. "Let's see what tomorrow brings," she whispered. And for the first time since Milo arrived at Willow Creek, tomorrow didn't feel hopeless. By the next morning, Willow Creek felt different. Not dramatically. No one would have noticed it driving past the reserve or walking the fences at dawn. But those who had been watching Milo day after day felt it immediately. The air around the oak tree wasn't as heavy. The silence wasn't as suffocating. Something subtle had shifted, like the first thin crack in a block of winter ice. Emily stood in the observation post before sunrise, her palms flat against the counter as she waited for Scout to wake. The kitten lay curled at Milo's feet, breathing softly, tiny paws twitching as though even in sleep he was preparing for whatever challenge grief would present next. "Here we go," Jake muttered beside her. "Morning show's about to start." Scout woke with a dramatic yawn, stretching his legs until his tiny toes splayed out. For a moment, he blinked at the horizon, dazed. Then his gaze tracked upward, toward Milo's towering presence. And that was all it took. Scout sprang into action with renewed purpose, launching his ritual morning assault. He darted forward, swatted at Milo's trunk, circled his legs, and even gave a triumphant squeak as he attempted a clumsy climb. But this time, Milo responded. Not with much. Just a slow lift of one enormous foot as Scout darted beneath it, a gesture so measured it almost seemed intentional. Emily's breath caught. "Did he just—" "Lift his leg," Jake finished. "Yep. That elephant just let the kitten run under him on purpose." Scout skidded to a stop, startled by the new movement. He stared up at Milo, his ears perked, body rigid with wonder. Then sheer delight exploded out of him. He spun in a tight circle, bounced once, then threw himself back into the fray with twice the enthusiasm. Milo lifted his leg again and again. Not fast, not playful, not yet, but deliberate, controlled, like a man remembering how to nod after months of forgetting he had a neck. Lily burst into the observation room, breathless. "I saw it on the outside monitor. Did he really?" "He's engaging," Emily whispered, unable to take her eyes off the screen. "He's actually engaging." Grace scrambled to adjust the zoom on one of the cameras. "Hold on. Look, the trunk." Milo's trunk, limp and lifeless for months, shifted just slightly to the left, then right, then hovered above Scout like a cautious question. Scout swatted at it instantly. And for the first time since his mother died, Milo made a sound. It wasn't a trumpet. It wasn't even loud. It was a soft, rolling rumble, the kind baby elephants make when they see something curious, or something they're not sure whether to trust. Emily's throat closed. "Oh my God, he's playing." Jake grinned like a man trying not to cry. "Doc, the kid's doing it. He's waking him up." Scout, hearing the rumble, puffed up proudly like he'd just won a prize at a fair. He leapt at Milo's trunk again, hoping to coax more sound out of him. Milo responded with another gentle sway, moving the trunk just far enough for Scout to miss it by inches. A game. An honest-to-goodness game. The staff in the observation room watched in stunned silence as the kitten and elephant fell into a rhythm that felt ancient and new at once. Predator and giant, orphan and orphan, grief meeting defiance in a dance neither had ever been taught. "He's adapting," Emily murmured, scribbling notes onto her clipboard with shaky hands. Responding to Scout's movement, adjusting his trunk to match the kitten's pace, that's coordinated behavior, purposeful behavior. "It's more than purposeful," Lily said gently. "It's connection." For 20 minutes, Scout darted and Milo answered. Not dramatically, not energetically, but enough. Enough to count as living, as trying, as reaching out from the cavern he'd been trapped in far too long. Then, as though sensing the shift in the room, Grace spoke softly. "This is beautiful." "It's a miracle," Jake corrected. But miracles rarely arrive alone. Because just as Scout attempted his boldest move yet, pouncing at Milo's trunk from atop a small rock, Emily's tablet buzzed with a new email. She glanced down, her face paled. Jake noticed instantly. "Doc, what's wrong?" Emily swallowed hard, reading the sender. "State Wildlife Oversight, Inspector Daniel Nguyen." Subject line, "Yuan scheduled facility review." This week, her voice was strangely tight as she answered. "We're about to have a problem." Jake set his jaw. "Tell me." Emily turned the screen so he could see. "They're sending an inspector, likely because our housing arrangement for Scout hasn't been filed under any normal protocol." Lily's eyes widened. "But if they see the kitten in with Milo, they'll shut it down," Jake finished grimly. Grace's hands trembled around her tablet. "We can't separate them now, not when Milo's finally responding." Emily bit the inside of her cheek. She knew exactly what this meant. Any deviation from standard animal welfare guidelines could be grounds for immediate violation. Sanctions, fines, forced relocation. The inspector wouldn't care about the context. He would see a kitten placed in an elephant's enclosure and shut the entire project down. And losing Scout's presence now. No, Milo might not survive another collapse. "We need time," Emily whispered. "Just a little more time." As if hearing her worry, Scout suddenly tripped over his own paws and tumbled into the grass. Milo shifted, instinctively this time, and lowered his trunk toward him, nudging him back onto his feet with the gentlest sweep imaginable. Emily's breath hitched. Jake placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Doc, there's no inspector walking into this place who can watch that and say it's wrong." Emily closed her eyes, fighting the sting behind them. "We'll have to hope you're right." Below the oak tree, Scout shook off the tumble, puffed out his chest, and returned to battle with fresh determination. Tiny, ridiculous, brave beyond measure. Milo watched him now. Not fully, not entirely, but with eyes that no longer looked like empty rooms. "Let him keep playing," Emily whispered. "We'll figure the rest out." And for the next half hour, as the sun climbed into the Texas sky, Kitten and Elephant played a strange, delicate game that looked more like healing than anything Emily had seen in all her years at Willow Creek. A miracle, indeed, and one an inspector might not be ready to understand. Inspector Daniel Nguyen arrived 3 days later. Sharp suit, polished shoes, clipboard tucked under one arm as if he were stepping into a courtroom rather than a wildlife reserve. His expression was neutral, unreadable, but Emily could tell immediately. This was a man who had shut down countless special exceptions in his career. Willow Creek would be no different. Jake muttered under his breath as the inspector approached. "He walks like a man who's never held a kitten. A day in his life." Emily elbowed him lightly. "Please don't start." But she understood the sentiment. They couldn't afford one wrong word. Harris stood a few steps ahead of them, hands folded, posture formal. The tension in the air was thick enough to taste. "Inspector Nguyen," Harris greeted. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Thank you for your cooperation," Nguyen replied, eyes sharp behind thin-rimmed glasses. "We've received reports of an unconventional housing arrangement at this facility. A kitten placed inside an elephant enclosure." Jake muttered, "News travels faster than common sense." Emily shot him a warning look. Nguyen adjusted his clipboard. "I'll need to inspect the habitat, review all footage, and examine the animals involved. If I determine that the arrangement violates Section 14B of the State Wildlife Safety Code, I'll issue an immediate order of separation." Emily's jaw tightened. That was the nightmare scenario, but arguing now would only make things worse. "Of course," she said evenly. "We'll show you everything." They escorted him to the observation building first. Grace queued up the footage. 8 days of Scout battling Milo's grief with all the ferocity a 1-pound creature could muster. Insignificant to some, miraculous to those who had watched it unfold. Nguyen watched with his lips pressed into a firm line. Even when Scout squeaked triumphantly, even when Milo first twitched his trunk, even when the kitten celebrated by spinning in circles like he'd conquered a kingdom. The inspector didn't react. Lily leaned toward Emily and whispered, "Is he even human?" But Emily didn't answer. She was too busy watching the inspector's eyes. At the moment, Milo nudged Scout upright after a tumble. Something flickered there, small, faint, but real. Then it vanished. "Thank you," Nguyen said, closing the laptop. "Now I'd like to see the animals directly." Emily felt sweat bead at her collar. Outside, the noon sun poured across Milo's habitat. The oak tree cast its familiar wide shadow, and beneath it, as always, stood Milo, but he was different now. His posture wasn't the frozen rigidity of grief. It was looser, softer, present. And curled at his feet was Scout, napping in a tiny warm heap of fluff. Nguyen's gaze swept over the scene. "I see." Emily spoke carefully. "Scout has been under 24-hour supervision, every moment monitored. He's stabilized physically and emotionally. Emotionally," Nguyen interrupted, "is not a category in the safety code." Jake muttered, "Well, maybe it should be." "Jake," Emily hissed. Nguyen approached the gate slowly, scanning every inch of the enclosure. "While I acknowledge what I've seen, it remains a fact that this arrangement is not approved by any regulatory framework. For the safety of both animals, I'll be requiring that the kitten—" He didn't finish. Because at that exact moment, Scout stirred. His ears twitched, his tiny head lifted. He yawned with the confidence of a creature who believed he owned the world. Then froze. His bright blue eyes locked onto the stranger standing at the gate, and instantly, instinctively, Scout panicked. He leapt to his feet, back arched, fur puffed up like an alarmed feather duster. He let out a frantic hiss, then scrambled in a circle as if searching for the threat's source. And when his gaze found Milo, he sprinted, straight toward him, straight for safety. When he reached the elephant's legs, Scout pressed himself against them protectively, not hiding behind them, but standing guard, tiny chest puffed forward as though he alone would defend this grieving giant against whatever danger approached. Nguyen froze, clipboard halfway raised. Emily whispered, "He's protecting him." Jake added, "Softer now, or he thinks Milo is the one thing in this world worth fighting for." Milo, sensing Scout's distress, shifted his weight. A protective movement, his trunk lowered until it hovered above the kitten like a living shield. Nguyen watched the scene silently. Then he said the words that made Emily's stomach drop. "I'm ordering the kitten removed from the enclosure immediately. Prepare a transport carrier." Scout hissed as if he understood every word. Emily's heart plummeted. "Inspector, please, if we separate them now, Milo could regress. He's only just started." "My decision is final," Nguyen said. "Bring the carrier." Lily ran to fetch it, tears already welling. Emily knelt, lifting Scout gently. The kitten fought, claws digging into her shirt, his little body shaking violently. He meowed, a tiny, broken sound, stretching his paw toward Milo as Emily carried him away. Milo's eyes widened. He trumpeted, a short, sharp cry of panic, his first trumpet in months. The sound echoed down the valley like something ripping open. Emily froze. Milo bolted toward the gate, fast, desperate, not aggressive but terrified. His trunk reached through the bars, searching, sweeping blindly for Scout. Scout responded with an anguished cry, squirming furiously as Lily struggled to place him inside the carrier. Nguyen stepped back quickly. "That's enough. Separate them at once." But the moment Scout's carrier door shut with a metallic click, something primal snapped in the air. Scout shoved his tiny paws through the bars, yowling so fiercely his voice cracked. Milo pressed his forehead against the gate, rumbling in distress as if begging for the return of something he couldn't bear to lose again. The entire staff stood frozen. Even Nguyen looked shaken. Then, before any of them could move, Scout did something no one expected. He escaped. With a speed fueled by pure panic, Scout squeezed his paw under the latch, rattled it once, twice, then slipped the tiny latch free. The carrier door popped open. "Scout!" Lily screamed. But it was too late. Scout leapt from the carrier and sprinted across the grass, faster than any of them had ever seen him move. Straight toward Milo. The kitten collided with the elephant's leg and clung there, panting, trembling, refusing to be moved. Milo lowered his trunk instinctively, curling it around Scout's tiny body as if anchoring him in place. A silence settled over the field, a silence so deep it felt like a verdict. Inspector Nguyen exhaled slowly. When he spoke, his voice was not stern or cold, but something unexpectedly human. "If this isn't therapy," he said, "then I have no idea what therapy is." Emily's knees went weak with relief. Nguyen adjusted his glasses, looking at them each in turn. "I'll amend my report. The arrangement may continue, under the classification of a supervised interspecies social recovery study." Jake's grin exploded across his face. "That's a fancy way of saying, let them stay together." Nguyen almost smiled. "Yes, it is." He made one last note on his clipboard, then he turned to leave. Behind him, Scout burrowed into Milo's leg, and Milo lowered his trunk in a gentle, protective arc. Two survivors holding on to the only thing in the world that had not abandoned them. A kitten's rebellion had bought them more than time, It had bought them a future. 6 months after the day Scout first stumbled, trembling and furious, into Milo's habitat, Willow Creek no longer felt like the same place. The air still held the familiar scent of cedar and sun-warmed soil, but now it carried something else. Laughter, movement, life. The oak tree where Milo once stood frozen in grief had become something entirely different. A gathering place, a symbol, a sanctuary within a sanctuary. Emily stood outside the observation post, leaning on the railing as she watched Milo wander across the field with an easy confidence no one had seen in him before. He no longer clung to the shadow of the oak tree. He explored now, slowly, curiously, as though rediscovering the edges of a world he had once given up on, and perched proudly on his broad back as if he owned the entire reserve, was Scout. Not the trembling, waterlogged kitten from months ago, but a sleek, spirited young cat with bright, watchful eyes. He was still small for his age, a lasting mark from early malnutrition, but he moved with the swagger of a creature who believed he was 10 feet tall. Jake joined Emily at the railing, sipping coffee from a mug that read, "Good humans rescue animals. Great humans work with elephants." "He looks good," Jake said. "Never thought I'd see the day he'd be walking around like that." Emily nodded, her heart swelling at the sight. "He's not just surviving anymore. He's living. And thriving," Jake added, "thanks to one very unreasonable kitten." Scout, as if sensing he was being talked about, raised his head high and let out a confident chirp that echoed across the enclosure. Milo responded with a warm rumble, a sound Emily had once feared she would never hear again. Grace appeared with her camera gear slung across her shoulder. "You ready for the upload?" she asked. Emily nodded. Grace had spent weeks compiling clips, Milo's first twitch of awareness, Scout's dramatic one-sided battles, the moment of separation and rebellion, and everything that followed. The play, the healing, the companionship. She'd edited it into a story so powerful the staff cried when they watched the rough cut. Today, it would go live on Willow Creek's channel. "They're going to melt when they see it," Grace said. "I mean, it's impossible not to." Jake chuckled. "If people don't fall apart watching a kitten save an elephant, I don't know what hope we have for humanity." The three of them shared a soft laugh. But Emily's gaze drifted back to the enclosure, to the pair who had rewritten her understanding of grief and healing. Scout climbed from Milo's back with his usual theatrical flair, landing in the grass with a tiny thump before prancing toward a stick lying near the water trough. He pounced on it, flipped it, chewed it, then dragged it proudly back to Milo and dropped it at his feet. Milo responded the same way he always did now. Carefully, gently, he wrapped his trunk around the stick and flung it just far enough for Scout to chase after, their daily game of fetch, their ritual, their language. Lily arrived just in time to see Scout tumble into a patch of clover and pop back up with indignation. "He's such a drama queen," Emily laughed, "and Milo puts up with every bit of it." "Loves it," Jake corrected. "You see how he watches when Scout runs ahead? He tracks him like a parent, making sure the kid doesn't trip over his own enthusiasm." Emily softened. They saved each other. The words hung in the air, familiar, but no less true each time they were spoken. A breeze rustled the oak leaves. Scout bounded back toward Milo, overshooting slightly and tumbling into the elephant's foot. Milo steadied him with a gentle brush of his trunk, then curled the tip protectively around Scout's middle. The gesture was instinctive now. Natural. Beautiful. Harris approached, hands in his pockets, watching the pair with quiet admiration. "I've signed the final paperwork," he said, effective immediately. Milo and Scout are officially designated as Willow Creek's first interspecies therapeutic duo. Jake beamed. "Got a fancy title and everything?" Harris smirked. "Interspecies social recovery partners. Try saying that 3 times fast." Grace snorted behind her camera. Harris turned to Emily. Meaning they won't be separated? Not for study, not for protocol, not for anything. A weight lifted from Emily's chest, one she hadn't realized she still carried. "Thank you," she whispered. "It wasn't my decision," Harris said. "It was theirs." And as if proving him right, Scout leapt back onto Milo's leg, climbing awkwardly but determinedly until he reached the elephant's shoulder, where he settled like a king surveying his kingdom. Milo rumbled softly, eyes half closed as he leaned into the sensation. "Look at that," Lily murmured. "They found family." Emily nodded slowly. "A very unlikely, very beautiful one." The sun shifted, casting the oak tree in a warm golden halo. It was no longer the tree of Milo's grief. It was the tree of their bond, the place where a kitten battled sorrow with every squeak he had, and where a broken-hearted elephant allowed himself to be dragged back into the world. Grace stepped closer, lowering her camera for a moment. "Emily, what are you going to title the video?" Emily watched Milo and Scout, two silhouettes beneath the oak. "The truth," she said, "that the smallest warrior saved the saddest giant, and the giant saved him right back." Jake let out a slow breath. "That'll hit people right in the chest." "It should," Emily replied, "because it's real." A final rumble rolled through the meadow, soft, warm, unmistakably alive. Scout stretched luxuriously, curling himself against Milo's neck, purring with absolute trust. Emily felt her throat tighten. "They're okay now," Lily whispered. Emily nodded. "Better than okay." And as the Texas sun glowed brighter across Willow Creek, as the oak leaves whispered overhead, as kitten and elephant rested together in perfect, improbable peace, Emily understood something she would carry with her forever. Healing doesn't always arrive quietly. Sometimes it comes in the form of a creature barely bigger than a handful, who refuses, with every fiber of its tiny heart, to let you disappear alone. And sometimes, that's enough to save the world for both of you.